Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and with me is my co-host, Don Preston. Don, how are you today?
Well, I have to say that I pulled a William Bell. I sat down and logged onto the computer at 39 seconds until the program started.
Yeah, I saw you. As a matter of fact, whatever you call it, when you get that little circle going around, spinning, it didn't stop until the pre-announcement went off. So you got in right under the wire. I've been sitting here actually for the last 30 minutes, so I've been in for 15 minutes. So
oh, my goodness.
I guess I pulled the Don Preston tonight. But at any rate, we're here, and everything's starting out on time, and so that's very good. Good to see some cooler weather these days, and, it's kind of winter is beginning to show a little bit here in the Memphis area. And but it's nice, it's good. You don't have to worry about doing a lot of sweating outside for now, and I'm grateful for the weather. But what's been going on in your part of town?
Well, just this is the time of year where things start slowing down just a little bit. People are kind of preoccupied with the holidays, and I have been trying to put the finishing touches, as you know, on a major manuscript of a new book entitled The Death of Adam and the Life of Christ, which obviously I sent you a copy of it. And I've sent it to a couple of other reviewers, and I've been going through that, trying to do the final editing. Lord willing, right after the first of the year, that book will be published. And I'm very, very, very excited about that book and the material in it. What is really interesting, William, is that, as you know, over the past several weeks, I've been involved in numerous Facebook discussions with different people, and a lot of it has to do with the death of Adam. And the more I have engaged in those conversations, the more I have become convinced that the material that I have in this book is absolutely correct. I have been absolutely appalled, amazed, and at times almost staggered by how ridiculous, how illogical, how unscriptural, how self-entrapping the what I will call, for lack of better terminology, the traditional view of the death of Adam truly is. when you take the position that the death of Adam was physical death, that physical death is what he introduced into the world, that raises issues that, I must confess, when I was a young man growing up and I heard that, I never gave it a second thought. I just thought that was the truth of God's word. I didn't have any questions about it. Well, all of a sudden I started seeing some of the problems. I realized there are some very severe problems with that position. And the more I've studied on it, the more I've dwelt on it, the more I've researched it, the more I have become convinced that the problems are simply overwhelming and fatal for the traditional view. And as I mentioned, over the last several weeks, I've been engaged in numerous Facebook controversies with men that are supposedly well-read, men that are supposedly knowledgeable, men that are supposedly debaters even, and they can no more defend the traditional view than the man in the moon. It's been so revealing to see their utter inability to defend the traditional views, and to see some of them just simply withdraw from the discussion. Others just simply start to get ugly in their verbiage, and others basically making up stuff as they go along in order to counter what is being presented. So it's been enlightening to engage in these discussions. It has been reaffirming in many ways of the fact that the material in this upcoming book is in fact absolutely spot on. It is in fact the truth of God's word when it has stood up time after time after time after time against the attacks of these individuals. And again, let me emphasize, these are ministers. These are not uneducated. These are not men that are not familiar with controversy, logic, and the issues. And yet, to reiterate, their inability to refute the material that I have presented has really, really been, it's reaffirming and it's reassuring.
Yeah, well, when you take a position, it can't be defended. It just can't be defended. That's it.
Yeah,
and,
that's exactly right.
I've seen some of I haven't kept up with all of it, but I know that you've been going at this for quite a bit, the last couple of weeks, at least since I've been paying attention to it. And I've read a few of their comments, and I mean, they just go from, Dan to Beersheba, as they say, with these bad arguments, and have no response.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, that's a whole lot of what's been going on. I've also been trying to finish up a couple of other articles. I posted one article that people may find a lot of interest in today. It is on the great day of God's wrath and the end of the millennium, and it's posted on my websites, and you can take advantage of that. I don't have to tell anyone that's familiar with theology of how vital a proper understanding of the millennium truly is. As I say at the very beginning of the article that I posted today, to determine the point of time of the end of the millennium is in many ways to determine whether futurism is true or or whether preterism is true. And so today's article is one of several that I have been posting over the last several months to show that the information, the evidence, is really quite overwhelming to show and to prove that the end of the millennium truly was in the first century. And this particular topic, the great day of God's wrath, is, I think, just really, really overwhelming evidence. I think people will find it very difficult to deal with.
Well, that's pretty good. I've had some good studies. I've been working with a few of the Hebrew Israelites, and we've got a class started now that we're doing on Monday. That we're doing on Monday nights, and I think we had 6 people in the class last night. And
wonderful.
Let's see, Yeah, we had 6 people in, and they were like, I mean, we went for 3 hours, a little over 3 hours, and everybody was still hanging in there all the way through. So nobody
Wow.
left the class, and it was very good. So they're planning to be back on next week, and we're making some headway. And some of them are taking the information that we're sharing and that we're studying, and they're going out and carrying it back, and teaching others with it as well, and having some little debate skirmishes also.
Well, I think what's that old saying? You got to bloom where you're planted. You have such a distinctive, special, marvelous talent, and doors are opening for you that could not be opened for anyone else. And I just think that the role that you are playing, and may I just use the terminology, the role to which God has called you and placed you, is one that the benefits and the impact of the work that you're doing, number one, it's certainly underappreciated by an awful lot of people. But I, for one, just stand amazed at the doors that are opening for you and the good that you are doing. And it may not be apparent to an awful lot of people, but I suppose that I know a little bit more about it than an awful lot of people because you share it with me. But it is absolutely incredibly exciting, the doors that are opening for you over there. And I just thank God and praise God for the doors that are opening for you.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it. There's some other knobs I'm trying to turn that I think would open even greater opportunities. And so I'm going to try to be very patient and prayerful about that area. But it could hold just great potential if I can get through that door. But another thing that's exciting, we haven't said anything about it, but we have an opportunity to go to India and work with the Nakrikkal School of Preaching for a few days in next year, coming up next year. So I'm excited about that. Glad that, the two of us will be going there, Lord willing, if we can get all the, funds and everything raised to make it happen. And, the men over there are excited about it. I mean, they're absolutely elated, and they're constantly asking for eschatology lessons and material, et cetera. I just need to go to my website and copy off some of the articles there and copy some of yours off and just start emailing them because they're reaching out and asking for information that they can teach. They want to know this information.
Well, I was sharing with my wife. I really had not shared with her very much about the possibility of the trip until you and I kind of got things firmed up, tentatively at least, yesterday. And I said, well, it looks as if William and I are going to be going to India. And she got this startled look on her face. It's like, I don't know how I feel about that. And I said, William and I have talked about this a good deal. And I said, we both really, really like the idea of going there, being there for 4 days of intense instruction and coming home.
That's right.
I said, I have often said when I've had other opportunities to go, I've had numerous invitations to go to India, but what a lot of people don't realize, folks, is that when you, for instance, when you go to India, if you're given the opportunity to speak at a school, if there are 50 people that come to attend that teaching service, you are expected to pay for their travel and for their food and for their lodging while they are there. And I didn't know about this until I guess the last time that we were that I was at Abilene. I don't think you were with me that year, William. But anyway, this brother came by the booth, and I presented the presentation to him, and he got very, very, very excited. and he said, "You need to come to India." He said, "This message needs to be in India." And we talked and we talked. He said, "Now," because I told him, I said, "Well, I'm sure arrangements could be made depending on the finances." He said, "Well, now here's something you have to know." He said, "I can get 200 ministers there, but you have to pay for their travel. You have to pay for their food. You have to pay for their hotel where they're there." He said, "Now keep in mind that one hotel room will lodge 10 guys." He said, because they'll just stack up on each other. They'll sleep leaning against the wall, but you'll still have all of those hotel rooms to pay for. And I was like, holy cow, that could get expensive really, really quick. And so for those who are listening to this, you have to understand that this is an ultra exciting possibility, and the doors that this could open. William, do I remember correctly that the brother that you're corresponding with said that they could get 200 ministers there?
Well, at this point, I don't know how many. I think it was, I want to say it's 70 this time, but I'm sure that they can get more. But I know for this particular event, they had kind of scheduled for, I think, 70, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. I misunderstood.
Yep.
Well, even at that, I mean, look, folks, the opportunity to go and to have 4 days of intensive instruction, and William and I will obviously be getting together, planning out our approach to present the story of covenant eschatology, so that in those 4 days of, and when I use the word intensive, I really mean that. I mean, this is all day instruction plus preaching at night. So
yeah, 2 gospel meetings each night.
Yes. Needless to say, when William and I get back, we'll probably sleep for 2 weeks. This is really going to be difficult. But the opportunity is just incredible. And the potential impact for the coming years in India is just, it's so exciting. So, folks, I want you to keep this in your prayers for us. And if you have a desire to contribute to that, I'm sure you can contact William or contact me, and we will set up special accounts for nothing but the India trip. You know, some years ago, I had a trip planned that fell through, and so I had to return a good part of the money. Most of the people actually said keep it since they had given it, but I did return some of it. But rest assured that we're going to be doing our very dead level best to do this trip, to go over there, to wear ourselves out in the service of the Lord and sharing the word over there. And I can tell you, I'm excited about this. I really, really am excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's, potential is going to be just absolutely phenomenal. It's going to be great. I mean, can you imagine having 70 preachers going out and teaching, and then, having the school doing that as well? That's just incredible to think about. It's really, really exciting.
One of the things, William, that we will certainly want to do is we will want to send over as much material as PRI can afford to do. We'll send off plenty of Can God Tell Time, plenty of the Can You Believe Jesus Said This, even an awful lot of In Flaming Fire. We will want to send over a good amount of material. And, of course, anyone that's familiar with shipping will know that shipping to India, shipping anywhere overseas is so tremendously expensive. And so that's another area that we will be asking for help on from anyone that wants to help out. I have an individual or two that often helps me ship books to Ethiopia. And so if some of the rest of you have a desire to participate in that, you would certainly be welcome to do that. But we want to take full advantage. We want to provide as much material for those good people over there as we can possibly provide them. It's just, as I said, it's such an exciting possibility and such tremendously exciting potential.
All right. Well, those are some of the announcements that we had for today, but we, have a topic that we've been discussing for the past several weeks on the Messianic Temple, and so I'm sure you're about ready to, get into that and get us going on what the Word of God says about the Messianic Temple, especially, against the backdrop of so much teaching that is to the contrary, and, all of the rapture mania and the rebuilding the new temple and the red heifer and moving, the embassy to Jerusalem, etc. So there's a lot to be said about it.
Boy, there certainly is. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, folks, is to set the proper framework, the proper time frame for the establishment of the Messianic Temple. Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 has been the focus of our discussion for the last several weeks, and rightly so, because it says, "It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains and exalted above the hills." This is a prediction by universal consent. This is a prediction of the establishment of the Messianic Temple. So when would it be established? In the last days. What are the last days? Well, we have spent a lot of time establishing that the last days, number one, are not the Christian age. They are, in fact, the last days of the Old Covenant age of Israel. When you set forth the idea that the last days are the Christian age. Now, let me back up just a little bit here. There are generally about 3 different theories about the identity of the last days. And even in the dispensational world, there is a mixing and a matching of that terminology. Thomas Heiss and Timothy DeMee, in their book, Prophecy Watch, published in, I think, 1985, they have a little chart identifying, as they claim, the last days. Well, the last days can refer to Israel's last days. Pardon me. Then the last days can refer to the Christian age, and then the last days can refer to the last generation of time, or the last generation of the Christian age. Now, they don't really press the issue of the last days being the Christian age. That's an identification that they do not press hardly at all. But they do nonetheless give 3 different identifications for the last days. You have the last generation of time, you have the, quote, Christian age, and then, of course, you have the last days of Israel, which is supposed to be the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9. Now, they fudge on that, okay? They really, really fudge on that, because the 70th week is supposed to begin with the rapture, and it's theoretically supposed to end at the second coming. Well, if that's true, then Israel's last days should have ended, or should end, at the second coming. But instead of Israel's last days ending at the second coming, they have Israel's age continuing for the entire millennium. And that Israel continues to exist as God's covenant people for that 1,000-year millennium, until at the end of the millennium, Israel is destroyed and God creates a new heaven and a new earth, in which all people, both Jew and Gentile alike, dwell in the new heaven and the new earth. So it's truly a convoluted concept. And my point being that when the dispensationalists identify the last days as the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, and have that ending at the second coming, and then 1,000 years of Israel's existence, you have just defeated and destroyed the idea of Israel's last days ending at the end of the 70th week. Because that means that it's literally Israel's last days begin Israel's millennium. That just makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, it completely makes no sense. So, what we've been sharing on this program is that Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 define the last days and the great and terrible day of the Lord in such a way that it precludes any identification of the last days as the Christian age. And as we will continue to discuss the last days, it will also demonstrate that the last days had to do with Israel's last days that ended in AD 70. What does all that mean? It means that the construction of the Messianic Temple is confined to the first century because Israel's last days ended in AD 70. They did not end at the cross, as amillennialism says, and they do not end at the end of the millennium or the second coming per se, at least in the dispensational view. Israel's last days do, in fact, end at the second coming if we understand that the second coming was at AD 70. But, pardon me, identifying the last days in regard to the establishment of the Messianic kingdom, properly identifying the last days as Israel's last days, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Messianic Temple was in fact constructed in the first century and was anointed in AD 70. Now, we need to go back to Isaiah chapter 3 in order to confirm this identification of the last days as being Israel's last days. We spent time last week with Isaiah chapter 3, verse 1, and for a couple of verses after that, where the Lord said, behold, the Lord of hosts, does take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread, and the whole stay of water. Look, folks, this is description of a time of famine. I mean, if the Lord takes away bread and water, guess what? You are in a lot of trouble. And what follows is confirmation of that. But here's the point in regard to our time frame, in regard to our context. This is clearly a prediction against Judah and Jerusalem. I want to pose the question again in regard to the claim that the last days are the Christian age. If the last days are the Christian age, and if it's true, as amillennialists and many postmillennialists claim, that God was through with Israel at the cross, then how do you deal with Isaiah chapter 3, verse 1, that in the last days God will take away from Judah and Jerusalem the stay of bread, the stay of water? If you're going to talk about the last days, which this is about, then how do you identify Judah and Jerusalem here? As we pointed out last week, this is not the church. If you make this to be the church, it just makes no sense whatsoever. Let's drop down to verse 7. Once again, we find this highly significant term, in that day. Well, what day? What is the antecedent to this? Well, verse 6, when a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, saying, you have clothing, be our ruler, and let this ruin. Well, what ruin? This time of famine, this time of warfare. And we'll confirm that this is a time of warfare as we continue through. So William here is described the last days as a time of warfare, the last days as a time of famine, and it says, in that day he, a man, shall swear, saying, I will not be a healer, For in my house is neither bread nor clothing, make me not a ruler of the people. In other words, when people would try to lean on one another during this period of time, saying, hey, look, you got bread in your house, and you got clothes in your house, you can be my leader, you can be my ruler. And the response to that would be, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to be your ruler. Verse 8, for, that's a connected particle, for Jerusalem is ruined, Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. Once again, folks, we have to deal with the language. Judah and Jerusalem are depicted as being destroyed. Well, that can't be the church. The church will never be destroyed. That's just a fact of Scripture. And so we have to deal with what the text is saying. This is a time of famine, in Jerusalem and Judah. And remember, this is the day of the Lord. This is the day of the Lord that climaxes the last days, and the last days are the time in which the Messianic Temple is constructed. Now, folks, I got to tell you, this is totally destructive of the dispensational viewpoint. They tell us that the Messianic Temple is not constructed at a time of famine, at a time of warfare. It is the time when Israel is delivered from war, is delivered from the Great Tribulation at the second coming, and then and only then is the Messianic Temple constructed by the Lord in the millennium. Yet that flies directly in the face of what this text says. In the last days is when the Messianic Temple would be constructed. But the last days is the time of warfare. It's the time of famine. It's the time when men would try to reach out to one another to try to find bread, try to find leadership. It's a time of the destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. Well, once again, in the dispensational paradigm, Israel is delivered from destruction at the second coming. Nothing about Isaiah fits the dispensational paradigm. You know, William, it's been my experience, and I have made comment on this in article after article and private discussion after another. It is amazing to me how the dispensational world literally goes to a text that is one harmonious prophecy. And they will have one verse talking about the Great Tribulation. The very next verse may be talking about the new heaven and the new earth that comes at the end of the millennium. The very next verse may jump back to, maybe the rapture or maybe the second coming. I mean, they have no unity of the narrative. It is as if in the dispensational world, God took all of these subjects, all of these themes, and all of these motifs, mixed them up in a blender, and threw them onto the page, and you have to have this magical hermeneutic in order to determine, this verse now, that's talking about the rapture, this verse here, it's talking about the millennium 7 years later, and the very next verse, now that's talking about the new heaven and the new earth at the end of the millennium. Oh, but wait, the very next verse returns to the rapture. Again, no unity of narrative, no flow of narrative. It's just a literal hodgepodge. And they do that with Matthew 24. They do that particularly, in my experience, with Isaiah 65 and with numerous other passages. And they have no qualms whatsoever inserting 1,000-year gaps into the periods at the end of a sentence, and saying, well, okay, that verse is this, and that now the next verse is 1,000 years later, and you just have to know that there's a gap there. You just have to know that. And you don't know it unless you have their hermeneutic. You don't know it unless you have their paradigm to impose over the text and make the text fit the paradigm. William, what was that old axiom in biology class that I know my teacher, who was a raving atheist, my teacher in biology class, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Very first day of class when I was in the 10th grade, Fayetteville High School, we all got in there, and she said, I want to know how many of you in this class claim to be Christians. Now, that's a strange way to start off a class on biology, but that was the way she started off. Well, 3/4 of the class raised their hand. So how many of you actually believe the Bible is true? Same number of people raised their hands. And she said, well, I'm going to tell you right now, before this course is through, I'm going to prove to you that there is no God. I'm going to prove to you the Bible is a bunch of foolishness. And she said, I will tell you right now, when it comes to my test, if you do not give me the answers that I demand on my test, you will fail this class. You will get a 0. You will get an F. Well, being the quiet, shy guy that I always have been, I raised my hand, and I said, and she called on me, and I said, well, Mrs. Taylor, you might as well just go ahead and give me an F right now. I said, because I don't believe in evolution. I believe the Bible is true. And I said, I'm not going to give answers that I think are false. What is your name? Well, I told her. And boy, we went round and around and around the entire course. She finally gave me a D, and she told me so, to just get me out of that class. Well, all of that said, she was nonetheless sharing with us on one occasion that there is an axiom in science that says, make sure your evidence fits your conclusion. And what she was saying to us then was that she recognized the fact that many scientists have a preconceived idea of a conclusion, what a conclusion ought to be. They have a theory, and so they make their evidence fit their theory. Well, unfortunately, that's what an awful lot of theologians do. That's what an awful lot of Bible students do. Well, I know the following is true. It has to be true. There's no doubt that it's true. So if they encounter statements from Scripture that are in pretty clear refutation of that, then they have no qualms whatsoever about rejecting the testimony, or just simply claim it. They'll reword the testimony. William, you've had it happen to you. I've had it happen to me hundreds of times probably. People say, well, I know that's what it says, but it can't mean that. Why can't it mean that? Well, because that's not what I believe.
That's exactly right.
Well, okay, so what you believe is more authoritative than what it says. That's what you're telling me. That's precisely what you're telling me. And so when we come to passages like Isaiah, chapters 2 through 3, and we see what the last days are, it is a time of famine. It's a time of warfare. It's the time of the destruction, not the deliverance from famine or deliverance from warfare or deliverance from destruction. It is, in fact, the time of warfare, the time of famine, the time when Jerusalem and Judah is destroyed. Folks, it does not fit the dispensational paradigm. that means that their definition of the last days is wrong. And obviously, this negates the amillennial view and the postmillennial view of the last days as well. Kenneth Gentry, a noted postmillennialist, is on record taking the position that the last days are the Christian age. Now, Kenneth Gentry will often hedge on that and say, well, there are probably some passages that do refer to the last days of Israel. Well, how do you delineate? How do you make one last days period to be a period of one generation and then turn right around and make that same identical term refer to a period of 2,000 years? By the way, just for information's sake, I took note of this last week. Kenneth Gentry recently wrote an article entitled "I Am Not a Preterist," and he rejects the term preterist, although saying he will still call himself a preterist. And he says, "I'm a preterist in some regard." Well, that simply means that he's a partial preterist. And he castigates those of us who are consistent preterists. We are to him hyper-preterist. We are heretical preterists and what have you. Well, I followed the link that I was given. I went to his webpage, and in the comment section, I posted a challenge for Kenneth Gentry to have a 2-hour formal YouTube debate with me. And that's been a week ago, but I certainly haven't heard anything back from him yet. Wonder why? Well, I suppose it's because Gentry has been challenged no less than 10 times, probably more like 15 times, to publicly debate me. And he just adamantly refuses. And folks, I can guarantee you the reason that Kenneth Gentry doesn't want to debate me is because he knows that he wouldn't be debating me so much. He would be debating his own writings. He would be debating his own hermeneutic that he has elucidated and expounded on so tremendously well in his different writings, because his hermeneutic would come back to destroy him in any kind of a formal debate. He's well aware of that. That's why he refuses to debate me. So,
that's a pretty
all of that, go ahead.
Admission on his part as well, when he decides to abandon the use of the term preterist because he claims that it has been hijacked by those of us who teach the full preterist view. What that's really saying is that, the preterist view is growing so much that he has to step away from it and not even call himself a preterist anymore. See, they tried they were really trying to hijack the term to make preterist mean a partial preterist, which is, in my opinion, a futurist, because they still believe in a future return of Christ. And but they wanted it to stick that the partial preterist view was really preterism, was orthodox preterism. And now that so many people are, adopting the full preterist view, he has to back away from that because, as you're pointing out in his writings, as well as people's understanding, they're seeing, well, that's just not going to work. And so he decides that he's going to give up the term altogether.
I think that's a very astute, and I think that's a 100% accurate depiction of exactly what has happened. Kenneth Gentry knows, and even on Facebook, even some of the most adamant, outspoken and angry opponents of covenant eschatology, they're constantly posting on their, these followers of Preston and Bell and, blah, 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 they just keep gaining followers and they just keep deceiving more and more people. And you're going, thank you very much. Thank you for acknowledging the fact that covenant eschatology, no, we're not deceiving people. The hermeneutic is there. The exegesis is there. The evidence is there. And people are seeing it more and more. And so he can lash out. These people can lash out all they want. But the point that you made is exactly valid. Kenneth Gentry knows. And by the way, I've been corresponding with a young man who is in seminary where a very noted postmillennialist is, I guess you'd call him the top dog. I don't know if he's the dean or not, but he's certainly one of the instructors of this young man. And the young man wrote a paper on removing the curse or triumphing over the curse. And this instructor, Keith Matheson, just came back and really blasted him. Now, I have to give Matheson credit. He wasn't totally ugly, but his wording was very strong. But the wording that I found and the comments that I found so remarkable is that over and over and over, Keith Matheson acknowledged that this view, that he calls heresy, of course, is deceiving, quote, an increasing number of people, unquote. Well, that's exactly right. That's what Gentry is acknowledging. That's what everyone is acknowledging. That's why,
you
folks,
can literally see it. I mean, you go to YouTube and just see people popping up everywhere presenting preterist, material and videos.
Oh, absolutely.
It's everywhere.
No, yes, it literally is. And folks, that's why William went to Nicaragua last year. It was Nicaragua, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay. That's why we've been invited to India. That's why I've been invited to Ethiopia, and I still hope that comes to pass, in the not too near future.
Invitations to Ghana.
Yes, that's exactly right. I'd almost forgotten about that. Preterism is growing everywhere. And by the way, folks, one of the things on my bucket list, I've already mentioned it to my contact. I want to go to Norway. I've got several really, really good contacts in Norway right now. One of the men is a preacher, and he preaches at a large number of churches. He travels and preaches in these different churches. One of the churches that he preaches in is a church of 2,500 people. And so I mentioned to him last year, I said, hey, we really need to have a preterist conference in Norway. Boy, would I like to go to Norway. That would be great. And William, I shared with you, what was it, a week or so ago, a contact from Costa Rica saying, you need to come to Costa Rica. And so the undeniable reality.
Kenya on the list and Brazil. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
There are more places to go than there are you and me to go. There's no doubt about that. So some of these other these young guys are going to have to start stepping forward and taking that lead and contacting some of these people and saying, I will come and just help spread the word. But as we have said on this program so often, William and I can remember the early days in which if we got an invitation to go anywhere except Warren, Ohio, to speak at a conference, it was like, whoa, wow, this is awesome. And now, look, the invitations literally are worldwide. I've been to Australia 3 times, been to Great Britain, been to France. And that's just the way it is. It continues to grow, continues to spread. Well, all of that, you see, the information that we're sharing tonight on the last days is part of the information that causes people to go, wow, wait a minute. The last days cannot be the Christian age. The last days truly were the last days of Old Covenant Israel. That would give way to, by the way, that would give way to the unending, eternal age of Christ, the new covenant age of Christ. One age was to end. An unending age would come into full bloom. I've shared this in my books. I've shared this on this program. I've shared this in public lectures. The Jews believed, and Jesus and his apostles taught the same thing. The Jews believed in two overarching ages. Now, mind you, they sometimes use the plural, and they referred ages to come, all right? But as William Bell has shared with us in the past, that use of that plural to refer to a singular is what is known. That is a well-recognized grammatical term, and it's when you use a plural term to refer to a singular reality. And I should point out, by the way, both N.T. Wright and Richard Hayes are familiar with that, and they call attention to the use of the plural term in order to emphasize a singular reality. So here are world-class scholars that are familiar with the fact that in the Greek, to reiterate, a plural term was often used to emphasize, to focus in on a singular. Okay. With that said, the Jews believed in two overarching ages. They believed in what they called this age, and they believed in the age to come. The age to come was called the Ha-Halam Haba. What the Jews called this age was the age of Moses and the law. The law of Moses. The age to come was the age of Messiah, of Jesus, as we know, and the new covenant. Third point, extremely critical. This age was always, in Hebrew thought, this age was supposed to end, which means the law of Moses was to end, but the age of Messiah and the new covenant would never end. Now, folks, if you don't see the power of that, you're not focused, okay? You're literally not focused. To understand and to catch the power of the fact that this age was the age of Moses and the law, the age to come was the age of Jesus or the Messiah, as the Messiah, and the new covenant. The age of Moses was to end. The age of Jesus and the new covenant was to never end, is to destroy all futurist views of eschatology. It destroys the dispensational view that we are waiting on a yet future Messianic Temple. Why? Because the age of Moses and the law had its last days, and those last days are the days in which the Messianic Temple was to be constructed. And it destroys amillennialism and futurism, because if we are in the age of Christ, if we are in the new covenant age, then the new covenant age has no end. Folks, how can you talk about the end of the current Christian age, the new covenant age, since the new covenant age has no end? And you know, I couldn't believe my eyes. A couple of weeks ago, Sam Frost, who departed from the truth of covenant eschatology, said there is no such thing as the new covenant age. I mean, I've said before, the guy is just devolving right before our very eyes. He is making up theology right before our very eyes. To deny that there is such a thing as a new covenant age, a denial made by a guy who claims that he is truly orthodox, that he is reliant and totally in line with church history, to say that there is no such thing as the new covenant age, the Christian age, is one of the most remarkable, disingenuous, false, and ridiculous things that could possibly be stated. I mean, how do you ever get so desperate as to say there is no such thing as a new covenant age? It's just incredible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that is really beyond, my thinking that someone would go so far as to deny that there was a new covenant age. I mean, that's like saying there's no new covenant. And what does that lead to? That's exactly what it says. I mean, you're just stuck with the old covenant. And, that is against the prophecies in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and, the New Testament as well. I mean, what do you say? Jesus would say, this cup is the Old Testament in my blood? It just doesn't make sense at all.
Obviously, that argument, and I don't even consider it an argument, it's just a bold assertion. And of course, he gave no supportive argumentation. He gave no supportive logic. He gave no appeal to no passage. He just simply said there's no such thing as a new covenant age. And that's simply the way he does anymore. He doesn't give exegesis. He gives bold assertions. And that's all that he gives. And he's certainly not above making bald-faced false comments as he has made concerning me over the last few days. I mean, just blatantly, willfully, purposely false claims about things that I have supposedly said when I have called him out, challenged him to produce the quotes that I have ever said anything even remotely close to that. He appealed to a book that contains no quotes from me. So he claimed that I had unambiguously stated that the human physical body has nothing to do with sinning. I've never said anything like that. Never inferred anything like that. We are human beings. We live in physical bodies, and with physical bodies, we do sin. But that sin is a sin, number one, if we're Christians, it's against the body of Christ. That's what Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Every sin that a person commits, is outside. But sin of fornication is a sin against the body. And that body there is, in my estimation, is the church. But all of that aside, there's no denying that we as human beings living in biological bodies sin in physical bodies. But that sin is a spiritual reality. It affects our spiritual existence. And so, all of that said, that when you have people that are so desperate as to stoop so low as to make bald-faced, purposeful, willful, fabricated falsehoods, then you know very good and well that they're realizing that their theology is in deep, deep, deep trouble, and so all that they've got left is fabrication. And so that puts you in a position of saying, well, there's no such thing as a new covenant age. Well, is there any such thing as a new covenant? Yes or no? Is there such a thing as an age over which the new covenant rules, resides, regulates actions within it? If there is a new covenant, and if there's an age in which the new covenant functions and regulates the life of those under that new covenant, then it's a new covenant age. As I said, the claim is so specious, it's so wild, it's so ridiculous, it's so illogical, and it's so unbiblical that it literally astounds anyone that is even remotely familiar with biblical truth. And yet, that's the kind of response, folks. That's the kind of increasingly desperate response that we continue to get from people who are attempting to refute covenant eschatology. There is not a scholar worth his salt that would deny the reality of a new covenant age, that would deny the reality of the new covenant, that would deny the reality that we're living in the age that followed the age of Moses and the law. I mean, how would you ever deny that? And yet, in order to maintain some semblance of futurism, that's where people wind up, making that kind of claim. And guess what? It's the kind of claim that dispensationalists are forced into making. Well, okay, Jesus appeared in the last days. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. The Messianic Temple was supposed to be constructed in the last days. That must mean that the Messianic Temple was to be constructed in the first century. But what do the dispensationalists do? They run and hide, and they say, no, it didn't happen. Well, I want to tell you something, folks. As we continue our study of Isaiah chapter 3 into chapter 4, you're going to see definitive proof that this last days in which the Messianic Temple was to be constructed would be consummated at the day of the Lord, and that Jesus himself identifies that time, that day of the Lord, so definitively, so positively, and so irrefutably that there literally is no escape from it. In the meantime, we're out of time. Folks, thanks for joining us right here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. As usual, William, it's great to be with you. Folks, we'll see you next week. Good night. God bless.
All right. Thanks, Don. Good to be with you as well, and we'll see you in the next broadcast.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.